Nils,
Yes.
thank you for joining. And
This works, yes? Okay.
this works, yeah. So what I wanted to start to kick off, usually when we have prep calls, when we are discussing, there is such a nice stories, and then all the time I'm thinking how to bring this knowledge from the preparatory calls here and on stage. And maybe this first question would be, could you introduce your professional experience from the jurisdiction point of view? So where have you worked? 1-tier, 2-tier industries?
So I've worked in Latvia, of course, but over the last 15, 20 years, I've worked in single-tier boards in the UK, the US, Greece, and Sweden, and in 2-tier systems in Latvia, in Estonia, and currently in Ukraine. So.
Okay, and from all this experience, if you would like to provide quite a simple answer, so where it works better, and if it works better, so what is the reason behind? So what is rationale why in one moment it is?
Yeah, I think it's, well, like everything, you can organize any business any way you want. It all depends on the people in the end, so if you don't have the right people in the right places and the right functions, it won't work, no matter how good your governance is. I mean, we could say we've had 2-tier governance in the Baltic countries for 20 years, and we've had banking crises, we've had all kinds of problems take place despite fairly heavy governance models. And then I think certainly some of it is related to corporate traditions. So a lot of this stems from the Germanic corporate tradition, which has made its way eastward, to Ukraine and the Baltics and other countries. So some people are simply used to it and are used to working in that environment. But I've found that single-tier systems, when properly structured, are much more efficient and easy to work with, and it just inherently binds the executive team and the supervisory non-executive teams together to really share the responsibility, legal and implied, and otherwise, in the vast majority of cases. So the two cases in terms of 2-tier systems in the Baltics and in Ukraine, they happen to be very, very heavily regulated banks. So in Ukraine, I'm the chairman of Privat Bank, which is a very substantial financial institution. We have 20 million clients, 20,000 employees. It's the largest taxpayer in Ukraine. Very big company. And also very heavily regulated by the central bank, and they do adopt the EBA guidelines, which are, as many of you probably know, just so you could say it's almost the best practice guide for how to manage, the second and third lines of defense through governance. And I think in the cases of banks, I could see where, the 2-tier system can work quite well. It can, especially if you have complicated situations or state ownership, it can be more facilitate the concerns of the state as a shareholder. It also, in my experience, the two cases I've had in terms of the single-tier and the 2-tier system in banks, one of the good things you can use it for is to separate some of the political issues from the management board. So when I became the CEO of Parex Bank, when Parex collapsed, it was actually very good to have a separation from I could focus on the day-to-day management as the CEO, and then we had international board members come in because we did have some very difficult things to do related to litigation against the former shareholders, which I could, let them do. And I could just, at least be able to say that I'm not dealing with a litigation. It's being handled by the supervisory board. And in Ukraine, I'm doing the same thing. So I'm the chairman of the supervisory board handling a very big litigation in London against the oligarch who used to own the bank. It's 100% state-owned. And our CEO from Sweden, who recently joined us from Swedbank, he's free to run the business, but I deal with it. So I can see it. I can see certain situations where a two-tier system can help maybe separate the management board from the politics, so to speak. Or in joint ventures like with La Telecom also, where I was an executive, and you have the Swedish side and the Latvian side. It does help you separate those situations, but otherwise, from a day-to-day business point of view, or from a foreign investor perspective, or let's say fintechs coming into the country, I would say most of them would certainly prefer to have a single-tier system, which again it lets you be more efficient and. You can make decisions more quickly, and there's by definition less bureaucracy. But it's really very important to ensure that you have the right people.
You mentioned this. I would call it the board as a buffer from any kind of influences that are undue. Mm-hmm. It can come from state as a shareholder who wants political ideas. It can be also, you never know who are your shareholders, or sometimes you can get quite a crazy demanding shareholders, and one is saying let's move to the right, and other is let's move to the left. But from your experience, if you're taking a bit down, so one of the main functions of the board is to setting and approving a strategy that management is bringing, and there is a good discussion, and board is challenging, and from the strategy point of view. So in both it can work very good. From your experience in banking, in telco industries, in other industries, so which model would be preferable in certain circumstances?
Yeah, I think on the strategy side, I would say certainly again, I would prefer single tier simply because what ends up happening in a dual tier system is that the management board ends up spending a lot of time working on strategy and dealing with execution matters day to day. And then once a year, we all get together, and you have the supervisory council. In the case of the
strategy session,
we have a strategy session every year, and then you have the supervisory council members who haven't really been involved. We try to keep it on the agenda of all of our meetings. In any case, how is it going with business, of course, but so I think there is an advantage if the non-executives and the executives spend more time together working on the strategy. I think in a dual-tier system, there is a tendency for the CEO and the management board to own they draft a strategy, they come and present it to you for a day, and then they leave. And a lot of the non-executives, in the case of Luminor, where I'm also still on the board, and in the case of Privat Bank, again, we'll engage all kinds of smart people like McKinsey and others to work on strategy. But we come together, and I think still in a dual tier system, I think there is a tendency for the board to be a bit more removed. They'll formally approve it, but they won't have the same level of ownership as they would in a single tier, where the strategy is I think by definition on the agenda more regularly.
Okay, but then this kind of a disadvantage that is mentioned for one tier is this group thinking challenge that executives and non-executives are. It is good that there is a trust and they're on the same boat. But what if this challenging functions and setting ambitious KPIs? What is the role of the non-executive board members in one-tier system are kind of not doing the work? So have you experienced something like that this is challenging, or this is maybe not the case in your experience?
Yeah, I think it's, a lot of times it depends on how strong the CEO is and how strong-willed they are. I think, I think you can have that situation in either system. Where a CEO can sort of run over a board, even the supervisory board. I think the important thing here again is, as I mentioned at the outset, is making sure you have the right people. So you make sure if you don't have non-executives who are prepared or really independent, confident, and prepared to challenge, then you will run into this issue where the executives on a single tier board could simply avoid some of the supervision or criticism or scrutiny that they should get. So the one example, we'll talk with, I was on a board with Davis 6 months, who we'll talk about in a minute. So we'll talk about Printful
on stage, yes.
in a minute. So I've been in, that was the US board I was on. But there's one I'm currently on a software company board in Greece, which did an IPO last April on the Greek Stock Exchange, and I'm the chair of the audit committee. I've been on that board for many years, and it was interesting. I think it's a family-owned business. I've been an independent director there for probably 5 or 6 years, and sometimes it's difficult, to challenge not just the CEO but the owner, who appointed you to the board. So I feel strong enough, to challenge them. But it was interesting. We did get a lot of scrutiny when the company did an IPO, and the Capital Markets Commission in Greece, took a hard look at who was doing what. And I happen to chair the audit committee, so for the Capital Markets Commission, that's usually the most important independent director, and had to go and actually prove to them that I'm independent. So, but I think in shareholders, when they set businesses up, and when financial investors set up businesses or they invest here, they would, reputation is very important for them, and they want people who can support management as industry experts, and there have to be people on the board that CEOs respect, also to add value to them. So I think it's, again, if you have a CEO that's taking advantage of that situation, you probably need to change the CEO. But I think it's, in most cases, in my experience, it's worked very well, as long as the expertise is supportive of the management and the non-executives, and the non-executives themselves, are behaving well. And yet you just have to make sure that you do have a strong enough non-executive component on single-tier boards to be able to make a change if it's necessary, or reconsider issues. I haven't seen issues, and where there have been issues, they've been resolved.
You mentioned this experience from Greece and US experience, and then UK and Baltics. Do you see that there is a challenge that in each country there is a specific regulation how actually the governance structure should be built, and that is something what every time you need to overthink again if you're working as a board member internationally? So my question leads, shall we have greater harmonization if we are kickstarting the discussions here in Latvia? Maybe we need to look to the Baltic region, because most of the companies that work at Baltic region as a home market.
That's what I raised on our call, yes. So, yeah, I think, I'm a great believer in harmonization. I think anything we can do to simplify the environment for investors, we should do. For example, there are, just thinking about the financial services industry, there are a lot of companies, payments companies, not necessarily systemic banks, but other investors coming and deciding which jurisdiction they're going to have their European headquarters in. And Latvia is actually very competitive in the Baltic countries. But this governance inflexibility could be one of the things that when they look at Luxembourg or they look at Cyprus or some other places, they say, well, it's just that's a tick against this environment. And I think the other is the extent to which all the businesses still, I believe, that the successful ones will either be, they'll be global at least, or at least Baltic, very rarely just domestic in each country. So the more flexibility you have, and the more harmonization you have, the easier it is for the investors. And I still think we should be selling ourselves as a Baltic market, rather than individual, very small markets to people, and also jurisdictions where things are consistent. I wish we had more fiscal harmonization as well. So for a Baltic business like Luminor, we have very different situations for, our more or less equally distributed business. So yes, I think the extent to which it could be harmonized, I do think that the one thing that I would mention is that I think there is a lot of value for there to have this single tier system like the US, where you actually have the executives and the non-executives on the same board rather than a board and a CEO. I don't know that there's that much difference between the dual tier and the CEO. I took a look at how Swedbank is governed before this morning, and that's the way. It's essentially a dual tier system. But you look at successful banks. You compare. I looked at J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan has 11 board members. The largest bank in the world, extremely successful. You look at Erste Bank, where our former CEO went to become the group CEO. You have 20 members on the supervisory board. 20.
So this is the maximum what commercial law actually allows currently.
Yeah, and then you have meetings, so you can imagine his. I spoke to him about this. Peter Bossack, who left Luminor and now is running Erste. And he has 30, 40 people in his board meetings. You can imagine spending that much time plus guests presenting. So there's probably 50 people.
Like a conference.
And it's not that much different for us in the Baltics, so whether it's Luminor or Privat Bank, 9 board members, 7 management board members, plus guests. I look on my board meeting calls, we have 30 people there all day, being tortured after they've been, through committees already with the same exact presentation. So it's I really think we have to think about substance over form when it comes to, is having meetings and sending information around actually, focusing in on the real risk areas of the business, and it's not necessarily the case. Right?
Do you have some questions from?
One, you mentioned that yes, you are working in non-executive boards in several countries in 1 tier, 2 tier. The question from audience is there any difference in remuneration policy for non-ex members?
Not necessarily. No, I think there's not so much difference. Like I said, I think it's more the industry that's different than the time commitment. So, where I've been on single tier boards, or am on single tier boards, those tend to be fairly new growing companies, which don't have to, we have probably 4 or 5 board meetings a year. In the banks, it's, in Privat Bank, it's every month we have a supervisory board meeting plus committees and all of that. So the time commitment difference usually drives the difference in compensation in most cases.
So it's not fixed. It's
not fixed. And then obviously the difference with new companies is that it's more likely that board members can have shares as well as part of their compensation. Where state-owned company like Privat Bank, of course, not.
But in Ignitis experience, we heard that actually the thing that you can count how many hours you spent in all those meetings, and this is kind of one of the indicator that in having more flexibility, we lower the number of board meetings. And of course, the question is how long. Usually you have a board meetings and so on and so on. But is it something different in your experience currently in your portfolio, all those companies?
Yeah, it's clear. I mean, dual tier clearly takes more time.
But is it still 6-8 meetings per year?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if in terms of the time commitment, I think one good example, I think where it works well is, again, in Greece with the systemic banks there, where they have the CEO, the CFO, and then the rest are independent directors on a single board. And, I think they meet every 6 weeks. So again, probably, less than 10 times a year. And I think that's also as much an issue of empowerment and delegation as anything else. When I started, just a very quick story. When I started, I was appointed as the chairman of Privatbank 3 years ago. This was just after the war started. My predecessor had, in the previous year, she had 90 supervisory board meetings, 90. Obviously, it was a nationalization, and there were a lot of litigation with former shareholders and things like that. But so I'm beating Ignitis on this one, and I cut that down to 12 because by law we have to have a board meeting at least once a month. But yeah, I think it's mostly about delegation and empowerment and focusing on risk-based agendas rather than volume. Even in Luminor as well, we had 3 separate banks with supervisory boards, management boards, and the holding company in Sweden, and we'd have 2-day board meetings every month. And by the time we finished the board meeting, the management board had to start preparing for the next one because so literally probably spending half their time on reporting rather than running the business. So I think it's those things have to be really focused on and get to the right balance. But again, it's important to make sure that you have a very strong independent directors. I think Latvia. Just one point I'd like to make generally is that I think Latvia has a big disadvantage because the management board members and supervisory board members are state-owned companies are civil servants, or have to report as civil servants. That means that you want to attract people who might be concerned about that. So it's not even about compensation. There's things like that should be fixed. But I think giving options to investors to have single-tier systems, which they might be used to, and might be more effective, certainly for younger, faster-growing companies, should definitely be something to be considered. And then, for the stock exchange, it's important for public companies to have very clear requirements on independent directors and making sure that the 3 lines of defense are well overseen. And as long as you have the right people in internal audit, failures usually are on the executive level in second line of defense, which might not be overseen well enough. That you have to ensure in any single-tier system. But I think having the non-executives and the executives together makes a lot of sense, and can certainly be more attractive for investors as they look at our region.
Well, one question from the audience as well, and then we are summarizing this very interesting interview. Nils, what is your opinion from experience when choosing 1 or 2 tiers? Is it anyways connected, related to amount of shareholders? Yes, no? You mentioned family. How does it impact 1 tier or 2 tier decision model?
Well, I think in most places it's it's driven by the legal requirement of the jurisdiction. So I think if you so I think but assuming, let's say we did have a choice here like you do in Lithuania, I think it would be it would depend on the shareholders' interest. So a government-owned entity might prefer to have a 2-tier system because you can build a bigger, I hate to call it bureaucracy, but you could have more people overseeing something. And in some jurisdictions, like in Austria and Germany, it seems that that's something that even the stock, even public companies like to see because of tradition. So I think, like I said at the outset, it's a corporate tradition in different jurisdictions. And and in the UK, the US, nobody would understand why you would want a 2-tier system. So. And I've been on courses on this in INSEAD and Harvard, and Harvard is just, they don't understand why would you even think about it. So I think there's a lot of concerns about duplication and so forth. So I think all things being equal, most people would choose a single tier system. Like I said, the only exceptions might be where you have these large, maybe joint ventures between governments and something like Rail Baltic, and I could see that being difficult to be a single tier system, and you might not want it to be because you have different countries owning a company, and those situations make sense. But I think from a commercial business point of view, I think you'd struggle to find people supporting a dual tier system unless they have to.
Thank you, Nils and Andris.
Okay, thank you.